Hello everyone. Today on the MEDUKAM page, we will discuss together the topic of the arrival of Indians in the beautiful island of Guadeloupe. We will see the reasons why they had to come to the island of Guadeloupe, the manner in which they arrived, and the way in which they managed to acclimatize and become an integral part of the population of Guadeloupe. Let's begin with the historical context. Indeed, in 1848, abolition has recently been declared in Guadeloupe.
The settlers require inexpensive labor. Numerous efforts have been made with labor from other countries. Impoverished Europeans of white descent, Madeirans, Japanese, Chinese, and later on the Congolese.
But also with Indian immigration. The master having become the boss and the slave having become the worker, it is now necessary to provide payment for the labor which was once completely servile.
Note that workers hired under contract have been on Moise Island since 1819, ever since they were first hired. Furthermore, British colonies also utilized it, commencing in 1844 for the Antilles, Trinidad, Jamaica, and also for British Guiana, a territory situated in South America's northeastern coast.
From December 24th, 1854, only 6 years after the abolition of 1848, the Aurélie, the first boat of Indian immigrants, arrived in Guadeloupe.
Smallest, 314 people in 1854 on Lorley boat, most loaded, 3,144 Indians in 1867. And so, from 1854 to 1889, a total of 42,326 Indians were disembarked in Guadeloupe. Men, along with women and children from faraway lands in India, hailing from distant regions and diverse backgrounds.
They possess the legal title of free immigrant workers. Indian immigration is coordinated by the
public
authority
in the decrees of February 13th and March 27th, 1852.
5-year agreement.
With a right of return passage.
The working day is 9 hours, 30, but the employee is required to work according to the needs of the establishment without compensation for this additional work. No overtime is paid.
The salary is 12 francs 50 per month, with 4 days of paid leave per year to celebrate the Pongal festival. The employer can transfer the employment contract to anyone. They have no recourse against settlers' actions in this contract.
This is the proposal that was put forward during a meeting of the General Council of Guadeloupe on November 4th, 1854. Coulis is well-mannered, gentle and polite, exhibiting a sweet and submissive character.
With meticulous adherence to the commitments and promises made.
The salary of the Coulis is the lowest of all those that are awarded.
In 1855, the French Indian Immigration Society was created in Pondicherry for the recruitment and dispatch of Indians to French colonies. They originate from numerous locations such as Madras or Calcutta, or even the central portion of the Ganges Plain. One of the most important texts is the Convention of July 1st, 1861, which accelerates this Indian immigration. Convention taken between the French Emperor and the Queen of the United Kingdom.
The French government will then have the right to recruit emigrants subject to
British Majesty and embark them at the port of Calcutta. The crossing is challenging and takes approximately 3 months with stops in St. Helena and Cape Town. Life on the boat is characterized by care, meals, and the continuous maintenance of the boat. On the boat, the proposal of meat, pork, or beef brings many disputes regarding the Hindu and Muslim beliefs of Indian immigrants. Some individuals give in to their hunger and choose to eat out, which marks the start of the deculturation process. Being too crowded often on the boat, diseases such as the flu, dysentery or lung diseases or even cholera are common. After quarantine, its distribution. Colonists get immigrants based on dwelling importance. Indians inherit the houses that were previously occupied by the African slaves, who were the newly freed Creoles of that time. But the rooms are much too small, dilapidated and often damp. The contract stipulates that immigrants will receive clothing such as pants, canvas shirts, and wool blankets. They're also entitled to free medical assistance unless the illness of the Indian immigrant is a result of misconduct. Their expenses will be advanced by his master, which he will have to repay later.
It was then that the Indians lost all illusion about the promises made to them by the various recruiters. We can well imagine that these recruiters made many promises to these already vulnerable populations in order to convince them to leave for the New World. If an Indian has the misfortune of filing a complaint against his boss, he often finds himself being pursued, beaten, and pushed to the point of suicide. We have a high number of cases of alcoholism in the Indian population during that time period in comparison to the harsh working conditions and abuse that were prevalent. A petition from the residents of India, currently immigrants residing in the French colony of Guadeloupe, dated November 14, 1884,
is directed towards the government of Madras, the British consuls of Pondicherry, as well as to all philanthropists in the region.
She condemns their bad living conditions
and work that reminds us of the times of slavery. In Guadeloupe, there exists a commissioner for immigration. He works in collaboration with 8 unions that are supposed to enforce the rights of Indian workers. But they bring up much more the mistakes made by the latter than the complaints they file against the master colonizers for abuse and violence. In 1873, 3 Indians are held responsible for the house fire. These final ones claim to have done this because they are frequently beaten and have to pay fines of 1 franc when they fail to return the requested herbs, and often they are then put into demigration. There was also a case in 1863. The Cavalier Mocomble in the Lemoule subjected the Indian Viranin to the torture of the ladder, flogging, and poured salt water on his fresh wounds. He locked her in the hospital for 3 days, with her hands tied behind her back. Despite the witnesses, the colonial master was acquitted. Furthermore, on March 12, 1883, the manager of the Cluny factory in Petit Canal made the decision to strike the Indian Mutusami, which tragically resulted in his untimely death. He was also acquitted. Essentially, only a small number of sanctions were imposed on settlers for misconduct or breaching the Indian contract, despite their actions. Few sanctions, it's been said, except for being deprived of being on the distribution list, that is, the list of registered settlers to receive new Indian workers. Some also found themselves deprived of their workforce. The Indian can only complain after obtaining permission to leave work. In all other instances, he is deemed a vagabond and may be subject to imprisonment. Numerous desertions often give rise to allegations of vagrancy. Some Indians clandestinely escape to the English colonies. Overall, there is a high mortality rate because sugarcane farming is arduous and suffers from food insufficiency. We can observe a low birth rate with negative natural growth rates. There is a single woman for a pair of men. And the relationship with black individuals is not simple, given the cultural hesitation, however.
Also, the contempt between communities. And on May 15, 1885, the ship Nera arrives, which is supposed to be the last ship of Indian immigrants, at least officially. In 1888, the Indian government banned the departure of any boat to Guadeloupe. However, the Nantes Bordeaux arrives in Guadeloupe in 1889, carrying the final convoy of Indians to Guadeloupe, a convoy of 599 workers. The Indian opinion is then alerted. We talk about disguised trades, new forms of slavery.
And if today, cohabitation and living together are functioning very effectively between the African community and the Indian community, and they now constitute only one Guadeloupean community, it has not always been like this. They were also paid less, which created an economic competition between the so-called Creole workforce, newly liberated, and the Indians who had just arrived.
The Indian immigrant is learning the so-called Creole language.
And in reality, a bona fide integration tool indeed.
We can have a conversation about
Henry Sidambaron.
who is a true defender of the rights of the Indian community.
French citizenship is granted to immigrants from India starting from the date of April 21st, 1923, by Henry Sidambaron, who fought for it since 1904. He engaged in a legal battle against the Viscount of the Loire, governor of the colony. So we discussed Guadeloupe in this video, but we are also able to provide some statistics for Martinique and Guyana. In 1855, the first Tamils arrived in Cayenne, French Guiana.
This immigration of Indian workers to the
Guyana officially organizes itself up until the year 1877. On May 6, 1853, 313 recruits arrived in Maritimique in Saint-Pierre on the Norelli boat. 55 convoys for over 25,509 Indian immigrants.
And I state that one of my sources for this video project on the arrival of Indians in Guadeloupe is the book written by Danny Beeble Gisler titled Grandmother, Why Did Sundari Come to Guadeloupe? It is aimed at younger people. It is very well illustrated, but it is also very good for adults, the older ones. From beginning to end, it is the grandmother who, through different subparts, different themes, explains to her granddaughter why she has a friend who has the same skin color as her, but slightly different features, slightly different hair, who comes from India. A book that I would recommend.
Janine Beeble Gisler is a Guadeloupean born in Pointe-à-Pitre in 1935. Sociologist, ethnologist, linguist, and writer specializing in sociocultural studies. She was the author of The Creole Language, Giggled Force and Culture and Power in the Caribbean, books that we will definitely return to during our different literary analyses in the future. There is also the work of Raymond Boutin, La population de la Guadeloupe, de l'émancipation à l'assimilation, 1848 to 1946.
So I hope you enjoyed this video, that you learned more through this story. Very beautiful story of the arrival of the Indians in Guadeloupe. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and share it on your networks like FB, WhatsApp, Twitter, wherever you are. Put in your stories, put on your news feed. You already know the family. We are together. Boomba!